Welcome back to the Agile Coffee Podcast's Espresso Shots. You know what's going on here. My name is Vic Bonacci, the host of the Agile Coffee Podcast. For the complete catalog of podcasts, you can go to agilecoffee.com/podcasts and find everything. But rather than listening to a full 1 hour long podcast, we're going to just listen to about a 10-minute or so conversation here with me pulling a topic off of the wheel, giving you my perspective on it these days, then going back in time and listening to how I may have spoken about it in the past with a group of people that you're going to hear from on the podcast topic. And then I encourage you to participate by going below and joining the conversation with us by leaving a comment. Also, while you're there, like and subscribe. That helps us out a lot. Share this with your friends so that we can all expand the conversation, right? All right, this is number 12 that we're on now, so I'm going to spin the wheel. We've only got 3 topics remaining, so let's see what lands for us today. All right, goes to 21. Rather than re-spinning it over and over, if it lands on an arrow, we just move it to the next one on the right. Dale asked, what do you do about agile mechanics without values? What happens when you have the mechanism in place for agile and you're kind of walking through the rites and the ceremonies and the processes, but there's no heart behind it? You know, kind of like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. He's just kind of like walking through life, you know, or maybe not because he's all rusted up, but once he gets free, he's walking through life, but he's got no heart behind it. He doesn't have that compassion, that reason for living, right? So that was kind of why Dale asked this question. You know, if you've got a team that's just kind of like going on because someone told them to do Scrum, for example, whatever the framework is that they might be using, but there's no kind of reason, you know, why are we doing this? Or if we're missing the values, maybe values of courage or openness or, you know, respect are just void and vacant, then it's not probably a very healthy workplace. You know, you could probably think of better ways to do the work. I think if you had the right values in place, 9 times out of 10, you're kind of on the road to success already if you have the right values in place. So let's see. This is back, like I said, episode 21. Back in February 2015, it was Dale who asked the question, but Jon and I joined him for the conversation. So let's give a listen to that. Dale, this is yours. It says, agile mechanisms without values.
Yes, this is kind of a topic that we've touched on before, but what I'm seeing now in a couple of organizations, in addition to this rise of Death March Agile, where it's like you may be using Scrum or Kanban mechanics, but somebody imposed a big hairy deadline with a big set of requirements that have to be achieved by the team by a given deadline. What I'm seeing is that there are organizations that are using some of the mechanics of Scrum and Kanban. They're going through the motions. They're having they're conducting most or at least some of the meetings. They're getting together. They're talking every day in a daily stand-up. If they're in Scrum, they're having the requisite planning meetings, and maybe a review meeting. The retrospectives are usually the first ones to go or get slipped on. But they're using some of the mechanics, but they're lacking some of the underlying values, in some cases some very important ones. I've worked for organizations where they're doing Scrum, but and this is where the Scrumbut thing comes in, they're doing Scrum, but the team isn't really deciding what to take from the backlog. A manager or a tech lead is deciding how much the team will take out of the backlog for the sprint, and then maybe that technical lead is doing the task breakdowns and the estimations instead of the team. So have you guys seen this kind of a thing?
Oh, yeah. It's prevalent. And I think what I'm dying to ask you is, if you were to take that manager aside and ask them, do you believe in the Agile values? What do you think that manager would say to you?
It would depend on the organization. And some of them, some organizations I've worked in, I'm pretty certain the management would say they don't care. Yeah. There's like, I just want the mechanics. I want this end result, and they don't really care about the underlying values. Mm-hmm. In other cases, I think that they would say that they care about them. They maybe just either have forgotten them, as simple as they are, mm-hmm. or they weren't educated on them fully to begin with, and didn't really internalize or understand the underlying value system, mm-hmm. as well as they did the mechanics.
Yeah. I just, as you were leading into this topic, I was thinking about a very strange experience that I had related to it about many years ago. Let's just say many years ago, at a place that thought that they were practicing Agile. And what it was is there was a certain manager whose desk I went to drop off, some paperwork, and I noticed a little sign that this person had. It said, "Seek first to understand," or "Seek to understand first." I think that's a Sean Covey quote, or yeah. And it's, I think, part of an Agile value that you could say, communicating, it works that way. You need to understand the opposite party first before you seek to have them understand you. Yeah. But in any case, it was my opinion that this person was never seeking to understand, let alone seek to understand others first. And it dawned on me that person was unaware of their behaviors being incongruent with their values. That person had handwritten this sign to themselves and placed it like just above where their computer monitor might be, like on a window. I thought, gosh, okay, so if this person is trying to do this but failing, they're probably not aware that they're failing. They're probably not aware how incongruent it is. They probably could really use a coach to show them how maybe these aren't matching up. But I think that's probably true with most of us. I often off mic, criticize folks who say that Scrum is immutable, even though Scrum is actually evolving. Mm-hmm. If we were not to say that Scrum is immutable, or the practices of Scrum are immutable, what we would have is people saying, well, of course, I can take out any part I want to and swap in any other practice I want to, and it's still Scrum, and I still get all the benefits. But you can't, as you know. And, in this curriculum where I train people in Scrum, the very first thing that we teach, of course, is the Scrum values. And of course, there's Agile values, and there's even Lean values. And one of the questions that I pose is, why do you think we're teaching the values first? Agile or Scrum or whatever. It's because everything's built on that, and you want them to remember that, because ultimately when you ask somebody, why are you doing this or that practice, if all they can tell you is because that's Scrum or that's Agile, that's not good enough. They don't know the whys, they don't know the values, they don't know where the value's coming from.
Right, and we've talked about this before on this podcast, but I just myself completed Jeff Sutherland's new book, Scrum: The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. And to anybody who's listening, that book is almost entirely about the underlying values or the reasons why things are the way they are in Scrum. So that's that's kind of a great resource for anybody who wants to really fully understand those kinds of values.
Absolutely.
Another book that you mentioned way back in episode 16, I just looked it up, is Edward Yourdon. He had the book Death March.
Oh, Death March, yeah.
Now, Jon wasn't here for that podcast. You should go back and listen to episode 16 back in November. But Alberto Hernandez was here. It was the three of us talking about that. And something you're talking about now, Jon, two things made me think of earlier in the podcast. We had talked about learning styles, training versus discovery. And then prior to that, you had mentioned something from the last podcast that we just got done recording. Slips my mind now what the topic was, but I mean, I'm finding these podcasts as a source of kind of validation and approximation of where that one truth lies. I think that in your case, Jon, when you walked into the room and his office and he said, seek to discover first, it's one of those spots that was either pointed out to him, he needs to pay attention to that, or maybe he did realize and it's something he's working on, but he's just not very good at it.
True. And it was seek to understand first. Seek to understand the other party, presumably, and not necessarily a he. But it was it was almost shocking to me because I had built up this image of that person being wrong, that they didn't care, they didn't believe in the values, and that they were somehow actually trying to tear down everything that Scrum and Agile stood for. When in fact, I no longer now believe that that's the case. When they've got something like that prominently placed, it's probably important.
They're making an effort, but they just need that other that coaching
or closed feedback loop or something, right? And maybe that's even as Agile coaches or Scrum masters or whatever, getting feedback from our teams.
I'm always hearing, not always, but it's common to hear from whether they're teammates or someone within the department or organization say, well, Agile says we need to do this. And you're like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Yeah. But let's have that conversation. That's what it's all about, is the conversation. Join the conversation with us. Reach out on Twitter and use the hashtag TellAgileCoffee. Let us know what you think.